Ash sifted down like a cold confession. It came in slow, soft spirals, turning the air of the ruined city to milk and grief. It webbed broken roof beams and blackened statues and the good cloak on Jon Snow's shoulders. When he breathed, it filled his mouth with the taste of old hearths extinguished and the taste of men who had stood in those hearth-warmed rooms until fire found them. His boots sank to the ankle in a slurry of sodden cinders. A child's copper bell lay crushed at the edge of the street. It didn't ring when he nudged it with the toe of his boot, only turned to show a smear of handprint on its scorched curve. He had known other snows and other silences. Winterfell's quiet after a heavy fall had been kind. The quiet here was wary, waiting for the sky to take breath again and descend with flame. Ahead, Grey Worm soldiers dragged men in Lannister red to their knees against a half-fallen wall. The prisoners' shoulders heaved with the rasping gulps of men who had run and run and run until their legs belonged to someone else. The Unsullied moved with a surgeon's steadiness, and the steadiness today was worse than fury. "Stop," Jon said. Before he'd thought to find any other word, the word vanished into the great hollow of the city. Grey Worm. Grey Worm did not look back. The blade in his hand was clean. That seemed obscene in this soot. He spoke to his men in the clipped syllables of Valyrian, and another prisoner was thrust forward, shaking, his beard clotted with ash. Jon stepped between sword and throat. He felt the heat still living in the stones at his knees. He did not reach for Longclaw. He did not think steel would matter here. "The war is over," he said, in the common tongue as much for the men on the ground as for the one holding them there. "Lay down the sword." Grey Worm's face, always taut as a bowstring, drew tighter. The scar at his cheek went white. "The war is not over," he said. "Orders are given." "By whom?" Jon asked him, though he knew. The soldier's gaze flicked past Jon's shoulder, to where smoke boiled, to where, somewhere, the dragon lay sleeping or hungry or merely waiting for the hands of its rider. "By the Queen," Grey Worm said. He lifted the sword. There was no argument Jon could fashion in the language of orders. The sword fell. The sound the body made was a brittle little sound. The other men made no sound at all. After a time, Jon realized he had drawn Longclaw after all, unconsciously, as one might draw breath underwater. He sheathed it. He put a hand on the nearest prisoner's shoulder and felt the tremor of a bird beneath the skin. He was not a Septon, and words would not unkill the dead. He let go. He found Tyrion Lannister by following a line of footprints that staggered through the wreckage of the palace. The prints were as erratic as a sobbing breath. Tyrion was white with dust to the elbows, his hands cut and scabbed and freshly bled where the scabs had cracked again. He moved stones the size of his head one after another, small stones first, then larger, then stones too big for any man to move alone, until he slumped against them and slid to the floor and bit his knuckles until he tasted iron to stop the sound he was making leaking out. When Jon touched him, Tyrion turned his face up, and it was the face of someone who had walked all night in a bad dream and knew morning would not break. "Are they?" Jon asked, because he did not know what tenderness he might offer here, and so leaned on something like practicality instead. Tyrion nodded once. "Yes," he said, and that was a breath more than a word. Jon helped him to his feet. Tyrion's hands went to his chest of their own will, as if comforting a hurt child, and came away gray. "She's won, then," Tyrion said, and laughed in a way that sounded like a man whose ribs were broken. "My queen. Yours. Ours. Everyone's." They walked out together. The wind had picked up, and the ash came slantwise now like a storm out of the bay. The Red Keep stood without a face. Its windows had wept their glass, but still it stood, and at its foot the wide steps ran down like the ribs of some great beast bared to the sun. Unsullied poured across the square, ranks precise as lines in a ledger, Dothraki riders threading them living as needles pulling thread. The dragon landed upon the remaining high tower with a gust that sent grit into everyone's eyes at once. It crouched with the complacence of a cat atop a slaughtered bird. Daenerys emerged into the light like someone returning to a familiar stage, and the army below her raised their spears and their voices in a single name that cracked the sky in 100 tongues. She did not look tired. fire had been a cloth she had worn, and it had not burned her. Her hair was a banner at her shoulders. She lifted her hand, and the army fell silent, as if the silence itself were another weapon she could wield. She spoke valiant syllables Jon could only partly follow, words that received thunder in answer, words about chains broken and kings overthrown, cities freed and still to free, winter and night turned back by fire and blood. They loved her. Their eyes shone. When she finished, Tyrion stepped forward into that hush and did a strange thing. He pulled the brooch shaped as a hand from his breast with his dust-blood hands and let it fall. It clinked on the stone like the bell had not. He stood within arm's reach of her in front of a host that would have died for her, and with a dragon peering down like a god. He told her he had freed his brother. He told her what he thought of what had been done. She took him into custody. Jon said nothing while they led Tyrion away. He had spoken too many words lately that had changed nothing of import. He watched the army swell tighter upon itself with pride. He watched the dragon shift its weight until the stone it sat upon cried out. He watched the queen standing with all the sky behind her, and the thought came to him with the clarity of ice that it was not enough to stand beside a river hoping it would freeze. One built a bridge or one drowned. When she came down the steps, she smiled at him, and that smile was a blade in a beautiful scabbard. He went to one knee as he had before because it had been true, and because some truths hid other truths within them, and because men could feel two contrary things at once as easily as they could breathe. "My queen," he said. "Rise, Jon Snow," she answered, like she was granting him a small grace out of her treasury. Her eyes went over his shoulder to the frozen places in line and file. "It is done. At last it is done." Her voice fell lower. "There are still places to free. The men have that fire in them. I have it in me." "They have families," Jon said. He could not dress this in court finery. "They have homes, children." "I know," she said. "They have those things because of me now. A mother's love is a good thing. Better with a full belly and no lord's whip." He tasted ash again, but it was only ash. "The realm will need bread and clean water and quiet. For a time." "For a time," she echoed, and the words sounded compliant, but there was an iron hinge in them. "Then we will go on. There are others. In the north who did not bend the knee when asked. In the Iron Islands when they forget what was sworn." A wind tugged the edge of her cloak and turned her hair to a different shape, and for a moment the crownless black of the tower above made a circle over her head like a coronation cruelly joked by the ruins. "The wheel must break everywhere, not merely here." He nodded because she was not wrong, not in the marrow of it, only in what blood one spilled to arrive there. He thought of Arya's thin blade and Sansa's cold patience and Bran's quiet that was not a boy's quiet. He thought of the old gods' faces growing on a tree when the tree had never asked for a face. If there had been a god of hard choices, Jon might have prayed to it then with a northern man's stubbornness and a Targaryen prince's need. There were no gods for this, only men. He did not sleep. There was no lodging for sleep anyway. The rooms were full of smoke and of ghosts. The dawn came as a bruise more than a brightness, and with it the gathering of captains and masters and the new-made officer of the city, whose badge was a strip of yellow cloth tied around his arm. The dragon had flown out over Blackwater before sunrise and returned slick with sea mist, scattering ash from its scales when it roused. Its smell was iron and wet leather and something older. Jon sent Davos to the docks with 100 men to break the hulls free of sludge and ash, to find ships still afloat in their moorings that could carry grain from Dragonstone. He sent Gendry to the forges to bend whatever iron remained into shovels and nails and pins for beams. He sent a washline of boys and girls and old women into the squares with water skins and rough bread and the authority to turn back soldiers with empty bellies who might think themselves more hungry than widows. He did these things as a man starts a fire in wet wood, in small and stubborn acts. He went down the long ribbed steps in the broad light with the sound of the river returning, and then he turned on the third landing and he went up again. The army parted without a word. He walked to the center of the wide-cut stone halfway between the bottom step and the place where the queen had stood. He could feel the eyes on him, Tens, hundreds, thousands, the weight of them like a stumbling pack onto his shoulders. He took that weight. Words weighted in him like cold iron. He drew them. "I am Jon Snow of Winterfell," he said, and the name drifted through the ranks without purchase, merely a stone skimming off a pond. "I am Aegon of House Targaryen," he said, and the syllables fell heavier. Faces turned from the edges. The dragon shifted. "By blood and by birth, I am the nephew of the Queen Daenerys Stormborn, blood of her blood. By oath, I am her man." He did not raise his voice. The space itself bore it outward. He did not flourish a sword because swords had said too much already. He looked toward the place where a throne had stood that no one had the strength to drag back into the light yet, and then he looked away from it and out across the yard to the streets and the skeletal roofs and the ash. "By right of conquest and by the will of her host, the queen has taken this city," he said. "By right of that blood which I share with her, and by every oath that binds a lord to the safety of the realm, I claim the Iron Throne in my queen's name, not to sit it as my own, but to guard it for her and for the people of these lands until the realm is made ready to bear her weight." The hush held. It was a living hush, full of the small creatures that scurried in a man's chest when he had said a thing and could not call it back. The first sound to break it was the stifled bud laugh of a Dothraki, who did not understand the common tongue but knew temerity when he saw it. The second was the long seethe of grey tide as the Unsullied took one step forward altogether. The third was Grey Worm's quiet voice in Valyrian, a word like a blade on a whetstone. The dragon turned its head. The world turned with it. The nostrils flared and the smoke in them came out like breath in winter. It slid from the tower as a fish enters deeper water and hit the stone with the full argument of its weight, and the shock of that traveled up Jon's bones like a blow. Its pupils were knives. Its teeth were old ivory from the tusks of dead kings. It lowered its head until its eyes were at his height and the eyes were fathoms. Jon did not kneel. He had knelt to a woman. He would not kneel to a beast. He did not bare his neck either. The dragon inhaled until it seemed all the air in the square had been taken in and none left for men. The smell of it filled the world. Jon lifted a hand and did a reckless thing. He laid his fingers against the scarred leather of its lip. The heat there did not scald him. He did not lift his hand away. The dragon's pupils narrowed to pinpoints, then widened, and in the glass of its eye he saw himself small and dark and stubborn. The sound that rose from its chest was not the building thunder of fire, but a low thrumming like a great cat's purr, hateful sound made tender by its maker. It exhaled, and the exhale blew ash into Jon's hair and made the white strands cling like spider silk. When it lifted its head away, the hush broke like a bowl. Some cheered, and some hissed, and some made the sound men make when they do not know yet if they will live to see the sun set. Grey Worm did not move. His face had not changed. Daenerys watched from the upper landing with her eyes like blue glass, and she alone of them showed something in that moment that was not soldier or sovereign. It was surprise. It vanished. She came to him in 3 unhurried steps, the fabric of her cloak making a sound like waves on shingle. "What are you doing, Jon?" she asked him, and it might have been an intimate question had there not been 10,000 witnesses. "What I must," he said. "What will save us all." She smiled as one smiles at a boy who has told you what game he thinks you are playing. "The throne is not for you." "I have not said it is," he answered. He looked up past her shoulder at the cold blistered iron in the ruined hall, at the shape of the thing men had offered their lives to for 300 years. "I will hold your seat in trust. I will keep your peace while you prepare to give them a better world. I will temper justice with mercy and mercy with law. I will do these things in your name." "You will do these things at my word," she said. Her voice had not risen. It did not need to. "Jon Aegon, you are loved. You are useful. Be counsel. Be sword. Be whatever you like. But do not be that." "Then cut me down," Jon said. And the words were no louder than hers, but they came through him like the moment a man steps into a fast stream in winter and the cold climbs to the hip and his heart lurches. "Before them. Before your soldiers and your riders and the folk who live here still. Let them see what you will do with any man who stands in your way, even if he says he stands for you." Her face did not change for the breath of 3 heartbeats. Then it changed all at once like a sheet snapped flat. Anger brightened it, and for a moment anger made it the face she had worn on the back of the dragon, looking down on a city built by men who had never thought of her. And he thought he could feel the heat of that gaze on his skin. Then the anger cooled by a precise degree, and he recognized something worse. Calculation. "Come," she said to him. "We will speak." They went to a hall whose ceiling had cracked from overheated air and fallen, leaving the sky where the plaster had been and the edges of murals bared like ribs. A table lay on its side with one leg broken and the others up like the legs of a horse killed at full gallop. She set her hand on the edge of the table and righted it with a careful strength and sat across from him as if the painted map of Westeros were between them again, though here there was only char to see. A woman brought wine. Jon did not drink. Daenerys did, a little, watching him over the rim of the cup in a way that would have once made his bones warm. Now it reminded him of a hunter thinking of which way wind carries scent. "You are not a man who seeks crowns," she said softly. "You never have been. When they offered you Lord of Winterfell, you said no. When they made you king, you winced as if they had put too fine a cloak on your shoulders and feared to tear it. Why this?" "Because I've learned," he said. "I've learned what happens when no one stands in the door." The words came slow. He had to push them out past all the parts of him that did not want to make her angry, and there were many such parts. "You have fire in you. Everyone sees it. You think it is a lantern. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it is a torch. Sometimes it is a house burning with the family inside. If I do nothing, men will burn and say it was the only way because no one put a hand on the torch. You will school me?" The taste of the smile touched her mouth without sweetening it. "You? With all the long history of peace in your blood." "Not school," he said. "Stand beside. Stand between when it must be done. Hold the chair so it does not tip while you carry a different weight." He leaned his forearms into the scarred wood. "Marry me." She had expected anything else. He saw it immediately in the way her shoulders tilted and then set. Her throat moved with the swallow she did not take. "Marry you," she said, not as a question. The wind carried through the gap in the ceiling and lifted a fringe of her hair across her cheek. "To make you king. To make me yours," he said. "To make me bound to you so I cannot be a rival, so they cannot use me as one, so you cannot mistake me for one. To make the realm look up and see two where they feared one." His mouth had gone dry as summer stone. "I will stand in your name. I will fall in your name. But I will not stand aside and nod at whatever you decide because you are you. That is not love. My father." And here the word rose unbidden and stung him. "My father would have said such love is worth less than silence. You have a father in every story you tell yourself when you wish to make me a monster," she replied. "Ned Stark. Your Rhaegar you never met. The old king's men sing of. Men and their fathers." She lifted her eyes and the old hunger was there. The hunger to be believed. "I have only myself to tell me what I must be." "Then let me be the part of yourself that says no," Jon said. "Marry me. Let the lords gather. Not for war, for a council. Call it what you like. Let them look upon you and hear you promise them more than fire." She sat very still as a statue left in a garden through a winter. In that stillness, the smallest things were loud. A drop falling somewhere, a pebble easing out of ash. At last, she put her cup down, and it made the lightest sound against the table. A bird's foot on ice. "You will not die for me," she said flatly. "That is not a bargain I accept. If I take you, I keep you." "Then keep me," he said. "Grey Worm will not like it," she said. "No," Jon said. "The Dothraki will not understand it. They will understand a wedding feast," Jon said, and felt the strangest smile touch his mouth and leave again. "They always did." She stood. The decision had made her taller. "Have your counsel. 5 days. The city will not wait longer." She came around the table and put her hand on his cheek. "Do not think to own me with this," she said softly. "Do not think to bridle me like a horse. Jon met her eyes and did not look away and did not flinch when the warmth of her skin moved through him in uneven, old ripples. "No," he said, "only to stand at your side when the path narrows, when flame licks your hands, when the choice is not between good and evil but between minutes bought and lives spent." She withdrew her hand very slowly, not in reluctance but as if measuring the span of a rope. "You smell of ash," she said, and her mouth brushed his. And the taste of ash was there too, and beneath it something sweet he remembered from the warm, stolen hours they had had on a cold sea. She withdrew. "Go then, build your bridge. I will come to walk it when I am ready." The ravens flew. They went out with ash on their wings and returned days later with northern frost or Dornish dust. Men and women came down the roads in battered litters and on weary horses and on foot. Banners held not high but high enough, not in triumph but in stubbornness. Yara Greyjoy arrived, with a scar down her forearm like an old coastline and 3 ships that had not burned at Blackwater. She swore the old oath again with new words in it and drank as a man drinks after a long fast. Edmure Tully came in plain wool with a look of someone seeing his house after siege and unsiege, and he embraced the smell of smoke in the square with a little wince and then held his head straight. The Prince of Dorne came wrapped in cloth the color of desert at dusk with his eyes tired and cool. From the Vale rode Jon Royce on a horse that shivered under its armor, and the young Lord Arryn with a new carefulness in him that had not been there when he had been a boy who loved sky more than stone. From the north came Sansa Stark with a train as well-fitted and well-fed as any Southron queen's. She rode with her hair bound tightly and her skin the color of winter milk, and her mouth was a line like a stitched wound. At her side rode Arya, who had refused every title and every warm garment that might have made the Southland's eyes easier, and whose gaze roamed the rooftops and the broken alleys like a cat's. Behind them a cart jolted, and in it sat Samwell Tarly holding a book with a kind of reverence that made one think the book held him more than the other way round. Brienne of Tarth strode with them, taller than the men around her by a head, her armor freshly scoured of winter grime and polished before she had sent it into ash. Jon went down to the gate to meet them. Sansa looked at him as if to say she had always known there would be a day when the sky would wear a strange color, and here it was. She kissed him on each cheek and smelled of rose oil and leather and the smoke from her own hearth, which was kinder smoke. Arya did not kiss him. She leaned into him for a heartbeat as if testing that he was real, and then was 3 steps away again and looking over his shoulder. She smiled, a quick knife flash of white between soot-dulled lips. "Nice trick with the dragon," she said. "Sansa says you've always liked pets." "I was a pet," he said, and she smiled again, and the second smile had something in it like pain. In a smaller room than the broken throne room and with a ceiling still whole, the first council met. Jon sat at the middle of one side of the long table, not at its head. Daenerys did not come. Grey Worm did, standing at the back like a study in charcoal. Davos had been persuaded to sit. Gendry had not. He was at the forges still, his hair matted with sweat that made the ash into a paste on his brow. Tyrion sat between Sansa and Jon with his bound wrists resting loose atop the table because Jon had cut the rope and told Grey Worm that no man would be chained here. Arya leaned against a pillar and spun a knife and did not cut herself. Sam found a place near the light. "We have no food," Davos said without preface. "No bread for 3 days if we borrow today to pay yesterday. The river is fouled. It will go clear again but not tomorrow. The wells, some are good, many are not. Men will get the shit and they will die. We have wood enough to burn corpses 2 days more. After that we must break ships." "We'll break ships?" Gendry had said that morning when the same problem had been pushed against his chest like a debt. And then he'd gone to the docks to direct a dirty army of boys with axes and men with ropes. "We have a queen," Yara said, "and a dragon, and spears." The men of the Iron Islands did not come to argue over buckets. "The men of everywhere else did," Sansa said, and the little lifted edge at the corner of her mouth made the words cut more cleanly, not less. "Buckets are kingdoms. The queen says we march," Grey Worm said into the air at large. "We take the Westerlands. They are fat. They will feed us." Edmure breathed in like a man stepping into cold water and then forced himself to finish the step. The Westerlands are not fat, he said. Not now. Oxcross has no oxen. Lannisport's warehouses were burned when the fleet fought on the bay. The mines stand, but men afraid to go down into them for fear the ground will light itself. We can pay you with promises and with or an with old pride. We cannot feed you, Captain. Grey Worm's face did not alter. We will not march, Jon said. Not now, the Queen. He saw the brief flare of Grey Worm's nostrils at that, not in defiance but in what looked like weary patience with a man who used titles as talismans. Has given 5 days for a council. We will not march during those days. Send men to Old Town and Highgarden lands for grain. They had harvests, and roads enough intact to bring it by cart if the ships are few. Send to the Mander by smaller boats. Yara, can you spare 2 ships? I can spare men to crew them, she said. Your hulls are beached, Snow. Gendry will have them off, Davos said. Give him 2 tides. And when the grain comes, who pays for it? Sansa asked, and the question was not petty. It was the question that kept men honest. Do we take it? For the Queen? There was no derision in her voice when she said Queen. It was cooler than that. We pay from Lannister gold, Tyrion said mildly, and the room turned to him. Do not look so startled. My sister always kept a great deal in places she could find when no one else could. She thought herself clever. She was only thorough. There are vaults under the keep you have not thought to open yet. He glanced at Jon. Make a show of it if you like. Let the people see you draw it up in baskets. They like baskets. He licked a split place at the corner of his mouth and winced. Send a portion to every sept left standing in the city and have the septons distribute it to widows and children. They will pray for you, and it will be an honest prayer for once. Have another portion carried to the camps by your soldiers at midday so they see it come by your hand and not theirs. As for the merchants who send the grain, write promises. Use wax. Everyone likes a seal. Men will carry bread for paper if the seal shines enough. The old, familiar sardonic edge lived in Tyrion's voice still, the way iron keeps its temper even after many heatings and coolings. But there was something else in it now, a rasp, a depletion. You've taken a new office, then, Sansa said. Steward of baskets. I am what he lets me be, Tyrion said, glancing at Jon's empty wrist where a chain might one day lie. He did not look at Grey Worm when he said it. What do you let me be, Jon? Useful, Jon said. Grey Worm's fingers flexed once. He watched the door, and Jon saw that he was counting breaths. They spoke until the candles guttered, and they found it was noon and they had not eaten. They spoke until someone brought in 2 bowls of thin soup, and the sight of it made half the table laugh and the other half look ashamed. They sent a rider to fetch Bronn because, though no one loved him, he loved gold and could smell it and make it walk on its own legs, and that was a sort of talent the realm could use right now as much as swords. They wrote the names of wells on a piece of birch bark and marked them good, foul, or uncertain, and sent small parties with men who knew herbs and bad water to mark the uncertain ones and tend the foul. They told the Dothraki that the horse lines would be longer tomorrow, not because the Dothraki had done wrong, but because the children would be fed first, and to their surprise most of them accepted this. The Dothraki were not unacquainted with hunger, nor with the memory of children turned away. At dusk Jon let himself be led to the cell where Tyrion had been kept because it was only right that a man condemned should not be told of reprieves by a boy with a scroll. The cell smelled of damp wool. A thin slab of light from the small, high window made a pale stripe across the dirt floor. Tyrion had made small games with pebbles to keep his hands from clawing the walls. He broke one game with his boot when he saw Jon. "Has her grace remembered she did not mean to kill me today?" he asked. "How obliging. You're not dying today," Jon said. "And tomorrow?" Tyrion asked cheerfully. "I've bought you 5 days," Jon said. "With your help you will buy more." Tyrion looked toward the window as if calculating where the sun would be after 5 cycles. "My favorite kind of purchase," he said. "Time. You can never wear it out or drink it away. It always suits. There'll be a council. The queen will come. Will she?" Tyrion's left eyebrow made a small attempt at arching, decided that was too much work, and settled for twitching. "She must," Jon said. Tyrion lay back on the rude shelf that served as bed and considered the beam overhead as if it might lean down to hear him better. "You are the strangest man I know," he said after a bit, almost gently. "I once watched a Sellsword bargain for his life with a man who had put a crossbow to his heart. He offered the man his second-best boots and the promise of a jolly story when they reached the next town. The fellow with the crossbow laughed and then found himself laughing so hard he let the Sellsword up. I thought then I had discovered a law of men. You are rewriting it. Instead of boots and a jolly story, you have offered the executioner the chair and said you will hold it stable while she does her work." Jon stood there and felt more tired than he had felt in a long time, not from waking, nor from miles walked, but from the amount of belief he had burned to keep himself upright. "I am doing what I can." "Yes," Tyrion said. "That is what you always do. The world crushes against you in places and you take the shape of it and break neither." "Do you have counsel for me?" Jon asked. "Yes," Tyrion said. "Sleep in a room where you can put your back to a wall. Eat venge. Those are not trivial things, not now. Men do not make good laws on empty stomachs. And one more thing, when you stand up in that hall to say the words you plan to say, do not think of her, not the way you have. Think of the city. Think of Old Town's white towers and White Harbor's long docks and Winterfell's Godswood red leaves. Think of children. Your face moves when you think of her, and you will need it still as a blade." He slept. He did not expect to, but his body betrayed every noble plan he made, as bodies will, and he slept, with the sound of water moving through broken pipes under the city like veins. He woke in darkness and went to the edge of the yard where the dragon had made its bed. The beast lay with its wings folded like a tent, its head upon its paws. In sleep it looked almost harmless, a great dog flung down beside a fire too hot for it. Jon sat with his back against a warm rock and thought of Ghost and of the feel of thick winter fur under his hand. The dragon opened one eye and then the other as if to make sure the first had not lied. It blinked. Jon blinked back. Brienne found him when the sky was pale. She had not slept either. She stood under the soot-stained archway like a memory of a better world and looked out at the soldiers laying a path of planks over a street where the paving stones had buckled. "This city has never liked me," she said conversationally. "It liked me least of all the times I came as a beggar." "You are no beggar now," Jon said. "No," she said. "Today I am a woman with a sword looking at people who need bread. I have had many titles. This is the only one that ever sat well." She turned her clean, open face to him. "You will make enemies." "I have them," Jon said. "You will make more," she said. "I am ready," he said. He did not know if he was. He decided to be. The day of the council came like a coin finally landing after an hour of spin. They held it in the dragon pit because the hall had no roof and because the broken amphitheater had something of the old world still clinging to its stones. A shape intended for beasts and men to share without eating one another. The chairs were all wrong. They had to carry benches out of half-burned seps and make them behave like furniture. 100 banners hung limp, some scorched, some so new the cloth still crackled when the wind found it. Jon sat low and central. He had put another chair there, finely carved, and left it empty. The lords and ladies came in and sorted themselves with the eternal instinct of their kind. The Riverlands clustered, suspicious as cats. The Vale made a clean line like a well-drilled company. Dorne spread with Langer future tense. The Ironborn took up as much space as they could without drawing knives. The North came in a block good and plain with the feeling of a wall. The Unsullied stood like statues along the rim, not men but a declaration staked into the ground. The Dothraki drifted, their horses' hoofs quiet on the dry dust. Daenerys came last, not to slight them, but because she understood that a room full of people would breathe more easily if first it had briefly been allowed to imagine itself masterless. She wore white. It was a strange choice against the ash. It made her seem untouched by it. She came to the front without a guard and did not look at Jon when she sat. She sat in her own chair, not the empty one he had brought, and it was a small chair, carved with dragons but not over loud. That was another choice. Something inside Jon unclenched a degree at that. He stood. He did not look at her. He looked at them. "The dead are gone," he said. "They took many. They taught us something and then went. The living remained. They took more. They taught us something too. It is time to make what we have learned into something that will last longer than one king or queen. It is time to make laws that do not depend on one person's hunger or mercy." He told them that Daenerys was queen by every measure men used when they were being honest with themselves about what sort of thing they worshipped. By conquest, by the oaths of a host, by the old broken promise of dragonfire returned, by blood. He told them he held her seat in trust to keep the peace until they made a peace they could all stand under without burning. He told them he would not stand in the way when such a peace was made. He told them the North had bled most recently and did not trust the air down here, and that its mistrust had been earned, and that he would not make its trust a coin to spend cheaply. He told them nothing of love. The time for speaking belonged to others then, and others came to take it. Yara swore again that her oaths bent only to Daenerys and to the sea, and that when the sea rose it rose for no man. And she grinned like she had grinned on the day she had first decided to steal a ship, and the grin made some men uneasy and some men braver. Edmure made words that stumbled but had the dignity of a man moving forward in pain without crying out. The Prince of Dorne spoke soft as oiled leather. Yohn Royce rumbled. Sansa stood when her time came and did not move until every eye found her and every other mouth had shut. "The North will be itself," she said. "We will not bow again. We will open our gates when there is trade to be had and knowledge to be shared and weddings to be made. We will send men to sit here when there is talk to be done of bridges and roads and laws for the middle of the night. But we will not belong to the South again. We belong to ourselves." There was a little hiss in the pit at that, not of anger, but of realization. The words had been hovering in the air since the first rider had crossed the neck bearing a letter with the Stark seal unbroken and then had returned with it unopened. Now they stood, and as with any truth that finally stands after sitting too long, there was relief in it even for those who would call it loss. Daenerys stood, and the subtle shift in the air was like lightning deciding where to fall. She had no notes. She needed none. She spoke simply and for once without the cadence of a speech. "I am queen," she said. "I do not apologize for it. I won a war no one believed I could win. I broke chains. I burned men who would put them back on the wrists of those who had slipped them. I do not apologize for that either." She glanced toward Sansa then, and though her eyes were bright, the line of her jaw had softened. "But I am not deaf. The world I came to rule is not the world I found. Thrones have melted before and will again. I will not be the one to sit when the chair is hotter than the people can stand." She turned, and now at last she looked at Jon, cleanly, with neither anger nor appeal. "If the North will not bend, it will not bend," she said. "I will not march on Winterfell if Winterfell will come here when there is need. I will not send a dragon where a raven will do. I will let the North be itself. If other kingdoms wish the same, let them say so now. Do not murmur it later in halls where no one can answer." A ripple went across the benches like wind across a wheat field. Yara lifted her chin. "The Iron Islands will be free," she said. "We bent our oaths to you, Dragon Queen. We do not bend them to the mainland. That was always true. Let it be true with a new word on it." Dorne did not need to ask. Dorne had always been a kingdom that dreamed of itself in a room with one chair. The prince nodded once, which in Dorne was as emphatic as a shout elsewhere, and said nothing. The Riverlands shifted in their seats and looked to Edmure, who swallowed and said in a smaller voice that they would stand with the crown. Yes, not least for want of something steady to rest against while the long houses along their water mended. The Vale had no appetite to declare anything, having always liked having a wall between themselves and the world. Royce said they stood with the crown because the boy they served had chosen to live and grow among strangers and had not died of it. The Stormlands were Gendry now, and Gendry was tempted by nothing so much as work. He said that he would prefer to see the laws written down so a man could read them again after a night's drinking. The Westerlands were broke and brave in the way of a man who has lost too much to be afraid of losing more. They would stand where the bread came from. It was a settlement no song would ever love because it tasted of compromise and ink. It was the best they would get if they were to have anything at all. Then men tried to blow them up. It happened because even ash settles, and even hatred, when it loses the hand that stirs it, will drift. The knot of them had been in the city since Cersei had taken the throne from her boy. They had learned the paths under the streets like priests learn their prayers, and the green ghost of wildfire had never left their minds. They came up out of an old caved well's mouth near the lower gate of the pit with the patient heaviness of men carrying worldly sin. Arya smelled the oil first. She was already moving before the man in the front tripped over the lip of the paving and let the wrapped jar in his hands tilt toward the ground. In another time she might have killed him for what he was about to do, and she would not have called it killing because killing was something else when it weighed this much. Now she cracked his wrist with the pommel of her knife and drove him backward into the men behind him while yelling a word she hadn't said aloud since she had been a child and had knocked Bran into the rushes by the stream. Heads! The jar flipped. It broke. Green fire crawled and spilled like joy turned monstrous. She leapt it. She was smoke with tendons. She slashed at cloth-wrapped bundles and groping hands, shoved a boy by accident, and then saw it was a bearded man whose eyes had gone flat with that old city faith that if you can burn the world you hurt back the thing that hurt you. The pit learned again the sound wildfire makes when it meets the A. If, for a heartbeat, there was the possibility of a thing that would unmake the rest. In that heartbeat men and women moved with the speed of people who have understood with their whole selves that they may not have another breath to spend. Jon Royce shoved 3 men in fur cloaks backward hard enough that one fell and cracked his skull and would wake weeping later. Brienne flung her cloak over a puddle of coming fire and stamped it so thoroughly her boots smoked. Davos caught a child by the scruff under a bench and pulled him out, and the child bit his hand and he did not let go. Grey Worm cut. Not people but ceramic, his blade flicking to shatter what might have become a god. The Dothraki took their knives to ropes and shrouds. Sansa did not move from where she stood. She stared across the pit and met Daenerys' eyes, and in that looking something calf slim and foolish and proud they had each carried at their hearts curled itself up and died, and something older and more useful and thinner and sadder took its place. The fire caught and then failed because the jars had been old and the oil not as pure as the conspirators had believed. It caught enough to lick at benches and scorched men's boots and once to singe the hem of Daenerys' white cloak. She did not step back. Jon ran, not to her, but toward the flare that remained brightest, because he knew himself well enough to know where his feet would always want to go first, and he decided not to permit them. He beat the brighter of the tongues with a length of wood. It hissed. It retreated. Spared him. It had taken enough for one day. They found the men. None of them had names that mattered beyond the names they had given each other in the dark for comfort. They had small reasons that added up to the same large reason, which was pain. They had believed no law would help them. They had believed fire spoke all languages. They knelt now and shook and looked at the ashes of their brave plan and could not stop weeping because they had not died, and they were not sure whether that was mercy or theft. Daenerys came down from her seat without anyone calling a guard and came to where they knelt. Her hand moved. She could have raised it palm outward, and the word would have been easy to shape in her mouth, and the dragon would have taught the city again what was to be feared. She lifted her hand and set it down again. Prison, she said. Bread, water, walls, and a hearing in 7 days with men from the city and men from the camp speaking for and against. Let the truth be said somewhere for once. It was a small thing. It was a big thing. In the smoke and the cooling heat, with men lowering their shoulders from their ears because they had made it through one more hour, Jon felt his eyes prick. He had not known he had been holding his breath waiting for this choice until he let it go. That night, at the high broken window where once courtiers had learned to gaze down with grace upon those who would supplicate, Jon stood with Daenerys and let the wind touch his face the way a mother touches a child's hair when she thinks he is asleep. The city smoldered less than it had yesterday. The river shone in one long ribbon where the current had found a clean surface, like a snake's back. I could have killed them, she said. Yes, he said. I wanted to, she said. Yes. She looked sidelong up at him with a small, astonished laugh that was not mirth. You will always do that, won't you? Tell me what I am. I don't think I can, he said. I can tell you what I see. Sometimes those are the same. She was quiet a long time. He could almost hear the thing in her that spoke in a language older than words, the language that had told a girl with bare feet and no army to walk into fire and come out crowned. At length she said, "Marry me, then. Let them see us in one chair and not two." He closed his eyes. "Yes, on one condition," she said. John did not laugh. "Only one. One I will speak aloud here," she said. "I will not have anyone say they own me. Not with a ring, not with a vow, not with a promise, not with a bloodline older than theirs. I will go to war when I must, and I will be merciful when I can. And when the world says I must be only one of those, I will be both if I can, and if I cannot, I will be what saves the most." She turned to him fully, and her face changed again. And this time it changed not to a weapon, but to something that resembled the girl who had stood on a balcony at Dragonstone with wind turning her hair and had believed in a shore she had never seen. "Stand with me if you can. Stand against me if you must. But tell me first, and touch my hand when you do it." He took her hand. It was as warm as a fire that had been banked and coaxed up again. They wed in a hall with no corners where shadows could gather, because they had chosen it for that, and because superstition, after all this hard calculation, still soothed. There was no septon to be had that any man would trust, and no gods would south of the neck worth the name. So they made their own right. Davos spoke for the sea, and Gendry for the forge, and Sam for the book, and Brienne for the sword, and Sansa spoke for the earth, because she had learned how to make a harvest out of a winter. Tyrion said a few lines, only a few, and they were wicked and kind at once. Yara flung salt water upon them and called it a blessing. Grey Worm stood and did not blink, and when the time came to shout the cheer, he did not. He bowed his head instead, like a tree that has taken a rope and decided not to strain against it. Afterward there was wine and there was food, because they had taken gold from under the keep and turned it into barley and stew and bread with faintly sweet crusts. And because there is always a goat to be found somewhere if a man with a pouch has walked far enough. The Dothraki danced. The Northmen bellowed a song that had new words set to an old melody, and no one cared that the words were clumsy, because the melody was simple and men could put their hands on each other's shoulders and sway to it. Jon drifted through this with a smile that came easier than he had feared it would. He drank enough to make the ache in his back a friendly thing, and not so much that he could not think. Late, when the moon was a smirch and the torches had started to gutter and the children asleep under the benches were being wrapped in cloaks and lifted, Daenerys found him on the balcony, where once the air had been full of ash and now it was only full of the thin smell of cold and the low sound of the city turning itself over to sleep. She came up behind him and folded her arms around him and rested her cheek between his shoulders. He felt his heart slow. He did not think of what would be taken from him to give this to the realm. He thought only of the warmth at his back and the distance between one breath and the next, and the name she had said when she had woken after the long night, with her hair stuck to her face and her lips white, and it had not been my dragon's. Not then, but his. The work began. It was the kind of work in which no single hour seemed heroic. There were no songs to be sung about men lifting beams in pairs, or women standing in a line to pass stones from one to the next, or about a boy dipping a pail into a clean well, and a girl carrying a loaf to a neighbor with a newborn who slept so hard his mouth hung open. But if there were to be a world, this was the work that made one. Brienne took the city watch and bent it into a thing that could stand without swaggering. She gave boys leather tunics and told them that if she ever saw them use the butt of their spear on someone's ribs, she would use her own on theirs, and when, out of habit, one did it the next morning, she made a show and kept her word, and after that the city learned a new rule quickly. Davos cleaned the docks until the wood shone like seal skin and the ships went in and out like a slow breath. Gendry's forges rang, and the sound was pleasant, like rain on a roof, because it promised roofs. Sam found 3 rat-chewed ledgers that nonetheless contained useful lists of which streets had been paved, when and where the nearest springs lay underground, and with these in hand and a younger maester from Old Town who had come because he wanted to write a book about this time, he began the enormous task of writing where the clean water flowed and where it did not, and of making a little mark on a map of every place a lantern must be hung at dusk. Tyrion sent wagons out with guards not to keep robbers away, but to keep the men in the wagons honest. He paid the men who carried the grain double for every bag that arrived intact, and half again less for every bag that did not, and watched the numbers climb and the thefts fall, because men are simple even when they are complicated. He sat often with Grey Worm and spoke with him not of mercy or philosophy but of supply. He made the captain agree to specific numbers and specific days and specific lists of who would stand guard where. He did not ask him to change his heart, merely his schedule. Grey Worm, who was a man trained to value precision above almost any other virtue, respected this. Arya patrolled the edges of all this like a shadow that had decided to be useful. She learned the names of the boys who knew the quickest ways across a city without being seen and the places where a man could buy a knife for a song or a piece of stale bread. She stopped 3 fires before they became one, and when a man asked her from where she had come, she told him she came from a house with no doors, and the man laughed and later told his brother, and the brother told a girl who kept birds, and the birds told the city, and the city believed it, because it needed to believe in a person who could come from nowhere to stand between them and the next bad thing. Sansa spent 3 days and 3 nights reading everything Sam and Tyrion and Bronn brought her that had the word tax in it, and on the 4th morning announced, in the tone of a woman telling a kitchen where to put the pots, that henceforth there would be a levy on all wine coming into the city that would be paid not in coin but in the use of the delivery carts for 1 hour a week to ferry stones or water or wood. This was such a good idea that it made 3 men angry enough to come to blows in the street in the argument about whose idea it had been first. She spent an afternoon with the women who washed clothes for the Unsullied and reorganized the lines, so that men who had marched all day did not stand idle wondering whether the woman ahead of them had skipped the line because her cousin's husband's sister had once cooked for a man who had brushed the queen's hair. After that, morale improved more than any stirring speech could have achieved. Jon did the kind of work men do when they refuse to make work into a story. He stood where men wanted to shout and made his hands lower when they raised theirs, and when that failed and someone had to be sent away, he found the place they could go and the person who would take them and sent them with a guard and a letter so they would arrive. He sat with a quill and copied a charter because he had always been a poor scholar and had to write words to remember them. He wrote into that charter the right of any man, north or south, born high or low, to take his grievance first to his lord and then to a hall of men and women from 3 houses not his own, and to have the grievance heard without fear. He wrote that no man would be burned for words. He wrote that dragons would not be flown over fields when they were seeded. He wrote that grain could be taken in winter only with the promise of more returned in spring. He wrote that the queen's justice would not be sharp on one day and dull on another, not because she woke in a better mood. He took this to Daenerys. She read it with her finger following the line, her lips moving slightly the way they had when she had read a foreign map for the first time. She marked 2 places with her nail. This, she said, and tapped the line about dragons. What does it mean in soldiers' words? It means we do not make men hate our banners because their wheat will be char, he said. It means you will still have wheat to feed the city you just took if you must take another one later. It means men will thank you for thinking of their wives. She tapped the line about words. I will not let them spit on me in my own seat of power. I will not let them, he said. But I will let them speak. We cannot make a world where a man who tells his friend a foolish thing is murdered for it by a 3rd man who overhears. That is not power. That is fear wearing power's cloak. She read the rest. She took a little knife and made a mark at the bottom that was not a signature and not a seal and not anything any law recognized. It was a scratch. This is ridiculous, she said. It is too small for what we are doing. It is, he said, almost smiling. It is exactly the right size. There were other things to endure. There were men who could not abide the idea that a grey company of foreigners would walk their streets with spears. There were Unsullied who could not stand the sound a boy made when he cried for bread because it was the same sound the boys in Astapor had made when the masters tested them. There were Dothraki who rode their horses through the market too fast for the comfort of men who had never seen such riders and whose wives had. There were old septons who muttered about dragons as demons and young ones who thought the queen was a saint and a few who said nothing because they had seen enough saints bleed for one life. There were noble women who asked Sansa to call on them with a little basket and a nicer voice and who found that she came instead with a ledger and a list and an expectation that they would carry water. Not out of spite, but because she did. There was Grey Worm. He came to Jon one morning with the same implacable step as always and said, "We are going to Noth." Jon blinked. "Now?" "When we can," Grey Worm said, which meant when the last of the lists had been made and the last of the quests for vengeance, had been denied, and the last of the men had been taught that the best use of a soldier's day was to lift a stone or a child. Not all, but many. This is not our home. We are soldiers. We did a thing. Now we will do another thing. Missandei of Noth wanted this. I want this for her because she is dead. I want this for me because I am not. He looked out over the city's red roofs and char and smoke and men who resembled one another in a way men do when you have watched them fight too many times to pretend they are different kinds. I do not want to watch a city forget what we did for it. I do not want to be part of a story told by men who hated us. Jon thought of the hot smell of the dragon and of how heat can make a room look like a mirage. He thought of how few of this man's choices had been his own. We will help you, he said. Ships, salt pork, water, grain for the months before the island is ready for you. Men to repair your boots, not because we want you gone, because kingdoms should help one another do the things that are right. Grey Worm inclined his head. It was not gratitude. It was a measurement. Men began to leave. It seemed impossible, after so much arrival, that there would be departure again. But the sea is patient. Takes what is offered. 3 ships at first, then 5, then a line of them that made the elbow of the bay look like the bent arm of a man holding out a long sleeve. The Dothraki fought each other and made up with each other twice, and then half went east because the smell of wet stone did something to their dreams, and the other half stayed because the feel of new plowed earth did a different thing to their hands. A stable grew on the hill past the dragon pit, and the children of the men who had stayed learned to sit a fast little pony with no saddle and to scream with delight as if they had been born to it. Sometimes, when the city stilled in late afternoon and the old shapes of its streets returned, you could hear the mice scratching in the rafters again. That was a good sound. The North went home. Sansa stood in the yard and looked at Daenerys, and the 2 women did not attempt to smile. They did not bless each other. They exchanged a nod that was as intimate as any embrace they had in them. If you send south for a thing, Sansa said, and the roads are bad, send a crow by White Harbor first. Manderli o usme a favor. If you find in your laws a thing worth stealing, Daenerys said, and you think I will not notice if you steal it anyway. There was a thread of a smile then. I will steal it back. Arya did not say goodbye. She came to Jon before dawn as the color of stone begins to change, as if removing its night coat, and touched his arm with 2 fingers. Keep your head, she said. Everybody wants it. Yes, he said. Not because of your crown, she said. Because it does what it's told by your heart. Yours. My head has a mind of its own, she said, and grinned and went. Tyrion stayed. Brienne stayed. Davos stayed. Gendry rode back and forth to the Stormlands with a face that had acquired new seriousness without losing its broadness. Sam went to Old Town and then returned because he had learned he could be a maester without a chain if he wished, and what he wished was to put one foot into 2 worlds for a time and see if something new came of it. The Iron Throne remained where it had been dragged, under a roof that had been repaired hastily. Jon did not sit it. Daenerys did. She did not do so often. She did not seem to take joy from its cold press through her gown. She said once to Jon, when they were alone and the dragon slept, "They made this for a man who needed a thing he could put under him to make himself taller. I have never wanted to be taller." "You wanted to see further," he said. "We all do." "We all do," she agreed. "Some of us will need better windows." So they moved the council to the dragon pit on most days, where the air was cleaner and the light honest. The throne remained. It was a story in iron, more useful as story than as chair. There were ceremonies because men like ceremonies, and because children like them, and because old people do too, though they pretend they do not. There was a day when Daenerys walked the line of 100 widows and took the touch of each hand and named a law for each touching, small things and smaller, like taxes on beans and the measure of cloth to be given for a burial shroud, and the right of a woman to own the tools of her craft and not lose them if her husband drank. There was a feast at which no lord was allowed to sit until every orphan in the city had eaten, and any lord who tried found Brienne's hand on his shoulder. There was a quiet morning when Jon took off his sword and laid it on a flat stone and thought for a time about what it meant to put a blade down because you had decided to, not because you had been forced to, and then he picked it up again with his left hand and tied it on the other side and walked home that way to teach himself a sort of humility. In the second year, winter came in truth to the south, odd and thin, a little like a high-born lady who has put on common clothes and is scandalized to find they fit. The city held. It held because the grain stores were where Davos had said they should be, and because the wells were clean, and because Sansa had written a letter in autumn to every small holding within 20 miles of the city offering a sack of barley seed in spring for every sack of turnips brought before the gates before the first frost, and because men had believed the letter, not because it bore a queen's seal but because the last letter had brought coins when it had promised to. A man tried to stab Jon on the 5th anniversary of the burning. It happened in the market where he had gone with 2 guards because he liked to count bread loaves with his square butcher's hands and ask bakers if the flour looked good. The man's face was as common as a coin and his blade was good steel poorly kept. He came at Jon not cleanly but out of the side of a crowd, and if the boy selling onions had not sneezed at that exact moment, Jon would have turned later and the blade would have taken him. As it was, Jon turned in time and the knife took him in the shoulder instead. A deep and ugly cut that did not find the heart. The man tried to strike again and had his wrist taken instead. The noise in the market was a dozen kinds of noise at once, the sound men make when something has gone wrong and they are trying to decide whether they are seeing it. "Don't kill him," Jon said, through his teeth because the wound was a hot fist. Blood ran down into his sleeve and made his fingers stick in the leather. "Bind him." They dragged the would-be killer to a pole and tied him there with new rope, and he wept, and then he cursed, and then he wept again. "For my wife," he said, the words sticking. "For my girls. For my son. For the black smoke. For the screaming. For the way the sky went away." Jon said nothing. He had no defense against grief. He stood there in his shirt sleeves with blood cooling on his skin and listened to the man list the dead as if he were reciting a prayer with all the saints' names in it, and he let the blade he had pulled out of his own body lie on the ground because there is nothing noble about holding a weapon while a man is telling you what he has lost. "He will have a hearing," Jon said, to the men who had gathered with cudgels and good intentions. "Not because he deserves it, because we do. Because we said we were different." He went home with the wound stitched, and Daenerys met him there with the face of a woman who had had the air knocked out of her and was not willing to show it in front of others. She touched the bandage with 2 fingers and did not scold him for going to the market, as if he were a boy who had lost the hand of his nurse and wandered. "It will never be over," she said. She was very calm. "They will always come for us." "It will never be over," he agreed. "That is all right." She laughed then, not cruelly, not sadly. "You are the strangest man I know," she said. "Yes," he said and sat, and let the pain be a map to the fact that he was alive. They grew old because everyone does who is not interrupted. Their hair altered. Her dragons grew slower, not because they were old but because they had learned the streets and the smells of the city and liked the heat that came up from the stones in summer and liked the sound of men arguing about bread in winter. Grey Worm's letter came one autumn to say that Noth was green and the men were alive and the butterflies did not bite when you left them in peace. It said that sometimes the water made a sound in the middle of the afternoon like a woman laughing, and that when it did, men laughed too. No one knew why. Jon read the letter out loud to Daenerys, and when he reached that line she laughed, and the sound was like a room having a shutter opened. Sansa sent a cask of northern ale every year with a note that did not say it was a gift, because that would have made it a debt, but said instead that White Harbor had had a surplus and she hated waste. Arya sent, once, a small carved figure that might have been a wolf or a woman or a boat. He kept it on the table beside the bed and sometimes woke with his hand on it. Tyrion drank too much twice and stopped twice and never boasted of it. Brienne swore in a voice that could peel paint when she saw a boy trip a girl in the street and then picked the boy up under his arms and set him on a cart as if he had been a sack and made him hand bread for an hour to anyone who held out a hand. Sam wrote a book. In the years when there was time to think, Jon thought often of the moments when everything could have gone the other way. There were not many of them. He could count them on one hand and have fingers left. The moment on the steps when the dragon had lowered its head. The moment in the dragon pit when Wildfire had flirted with the idea of becoming a god again. The moment he had said, "Marry me." The moment Daenerys had said, "Prison." The moment, long after the songs would stop, when he had put his hand on a girl's shoulder and said she could be apprenticed to a cooper if she wished because he would speak to the cooper himself, and she had looked at him as if he had raised a city from the ground. He died a little before she did, because sometimes love is not symmetrical, and because he had always spent himself as if bodies were a currency, and because the wound in the market had not been mortal but had been eloquent, and it had convinced his blood to speak and murmur rather than shout ever after. He died with the sea in his ears because Davos had taken him down to the quay in a chair with arms like a throne, which made them both laugh, and with the smell of tar and salt, and with the sight of the dragon flying low over the bay for the sheer pleasure of its own weight. He died with Ghost's head on his knee, though no one knew how the old wolf had found his way to the city again. And his last word was not a word at all but a breath he had been storing of a summer day a long time ago at Winterfell, when he had stood in a corridor where light from a window made a shape like a sword on the floor, and he had thought of other lives. Daenerys sat beside him and held his hand and did not tell him to live. She was not cruel. She was not greedy. She had learned. She ruled after that less like a flame and more like a lantern. And if sometimes she burned her hand on the glass, she did not let the pain make her foolish. When at last she too was done, it was in a hall with clean air, as she had always liked, and with bread on the table, and with no dragon in sight because she had sent them away to hunt. She called the lords and ladies and many who were neither to a council and said, "Let us choose." They did. They chose someone who did not want it. They chose someone whose eyes were steady. The Iron Throne, which had once been a thing men would cut their mothers' cheeks to sit, remained where it was, covered most days with a clean cloth so it would not gather dust. The city forgot some things and remembered others. It forgot the way a dragon's shadow moves. It remembered the taste of clean water and the way a baker looks at his oven when he is proud. It forgot the old shape of fear. It remembered a law about men being allowed to bring a complaint to a hall where 3 houses not their own would listen. It forgot the sound wildfire makes when it wakes in its jar. It remembered that the woman in white had, once, put her hand down when she might have lifted it. Some said Jon Snow had been a fool to stand in front of a fire and declare himself its shield. Some said he had been a knave to claim a throne in a name not his. Some said he had only done what any decent man would do in a city that had lost its voice. The children who ran in the streets did not say any of these things. They said dragon as if it meant I love you, and they said king as if it meant someone who will make the grown-ups share. They said snow when the winter came down in glitter that did not choke their breath, and they held out their tongues to catch it. If there is an end to the story, perhaps it is only this, that in a city that had burned, children learned to love the first cold flake when it fell.